Welcome to the Purpose Over Profits podcast. I'm Jim Floyd, owner of Ascent Total Performance.
And I am Jeremy Powers, founder of Powers Insurance Experts. I want to take a moment and shout out a show sponsor, Billy Colucci Custom Awards. Billy makes awesome stuff. He just does engraving, some Purpose Over Profits, cups and tumblers that we have. Also makes wonderful awards. If you are a business that is celebrating the success of 2023 or looking to change it up and add some excitement to 2024, even makes like awesome championship belts. I don't know about you, but I think we could use a championship belt here at our office.
Oh yeah, because we dominate.
That's right. Boom. Our podcast dominates. But once again, that's Colucci Custom Awards. Proud to be a sponsor of the Purpose Over Profits podcast.
Yep. So Jeremy, today we have the pleasure of having John Gressette in the studio, and we're going to talk all about real estate, all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm really excited about that because it's a lot of different things that I didn't know before being in a position where we need real estate. So I think it's going to be a really, really helpful conversation. So we're excited to have you and welcome.
Thank you, guys. Glad to be here.
I remember our first time meeting. It was so exciting figuring out that we both, you were like, you know, Jim. And I was like, oh, I know Jim. You know, we just took a little selfie, sent it your way. And you were like, man, I can't stand that guy.
I know. That's on the podcast.
That's it. It's a humble beginnings. So it's been a pleasure getting to know you, but then also hearing just such great things about you've utilized your services, Jim, and you've had nothing but great things to say. So, man, we are just super pumped to have you on the show to talk about all things commercial. I want to say insurance because I go to my mind, but commercial property. And so 2020 changed the game.
Yeah.
Okay. For a lot of people. And one thing that you'll see is I hear a lot of folks talking about is, man, the world of commercial real estate is changing rapidly post COVID. And so I just want to bring an expert in and say, hey, like, what are your true thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started in 2021, so I was coming in on the tail end of it. So I, can't say firsthand, but with Rox Pollard, my boss, colleague, he's been in it for 35 years. And so obviously coming out of COVID, a lot of vacancy coming up, a lot of businesses that were shut down during the pandemic. Yeah. And really, demand was just diminished. Not a lot of people eager to jump into retail, specifically is what we do, jump into retail leases with as much uncertainty as there was. So, Columbia specifically, we had Jason's Deli went out down in the Vista, a couple other, larger format concepts, Wild Wing Cafe recently. And so really coming out of COVID, the question is sort of who's doing deals now? And in Columbia, especially now, right? I would say that people who have never had their sights set on Columbia now do. We're really getting onto the map.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, even from 2 years ago when I started, groups I was calling on who wouldn't even pick up the phone are now calling us or signing leases in Columbia with other people. Wish it was with us, but they're coming nonetheless. So
man, that's crazy to hear. What do you think has sparked that interest and all of that shift?
I would say, we remained pretty stable during COVID, in large part thanks to the government heavy economy that we have here in Columbia. But the population growth, job growth, investment in the state has never been higher. Yeah. Scout, especially, I think is the tipping point for a lot of growth to really connect us to Charlotte. I think it'll be really exciting.
It's amazing how all those puzzle pieces fit together.
That's right. A lot of hard work by people like Jeff Rubel and many others to make that happen. So
it's cool to hear. So we talk a lot on this podcast about how much we love being in Columbia and just how we feel like it's a really great place to be. And so it's really cool to hear that that's being reflected some now too, with a lot more investment going in, a lot of different businesses coming into the area.
It's very refreshing to hear that from that perspective is that, we're starting, because that's the thought is that so often Columbia is looked over. I jokingly say when you go to the third floor of our building that we're in, there's the grass, that I'm sure as you were coming up, you saw all that. There's like this beautiful outdoor. I'm like, it's as close to Greenville as you're going to get in Columbia, South Carolina. But, they don't say it's as close to Columbia as you're going to get in Greenville unless you're like in a back alley.
It's almost like we're, the redheaded stepchild.
That's right.
Both Greenville and Charleston.
Here we are, the capital, so.
Yeah. But I think you see a lot of how much the city has developed recently with all the Main Street things, the Bull Street property, all those different type things. So it's really a cool place to be.
Absolutely.
And I was actually talking with a patient earlier this week, and because we were talking about some of those things, and I talked about how much I was pleased to see that thing too, because in my company where we're rapidly growing, we need more staff.
Mhm.
And we have a talent pool here, but it's also something too, is like the more Columbia continues to evolve and become even more desirable to live in, that makes it a lot easier for us to
Yeah.
have people move in.
Right.
You got to be able to attract the talent. You're attracting them from places that have a lot more going on. And so, my dream is that one day we would have our own professional sports team. But
Wouldn't that be
we're
awesome?
far
Yeah.
away from that, unfortunately. But it is a dream nonetheless. Well, how did you get into? I mean, maybe you were from birth. You were like, man, this is what I always want to do.
No,
Yeah.
I can't say that. Born and raised in Columbia, lived in the same house my whole life, and went to Clemson, came back, was planning to go to law school, and a close friend of mine, Rox Pollard, who was 2 doors down the street from me growing up. I grew up with his son, who now works with us too, but he called me, and as I tell it, saved me from going to law school. But took me out to lunch, and really, he asked, "Have you ever thought about commercial real estate?" And the honest answer was no. Outside of the fact that a lot of very successful people own it as a very successful investment.
Sure.
I hadn't really given it any thought, and he said, "Well, let me tell you a little bit about it." And what it boils down to is you're playing a role in shaping your community. You're playing a role in shaping the landscape around you. We were eating lunch in Groucho's and 5 Points at the time. He was talking about doing this deal and doing that deal, and how Oops got there, and how the Truist Bank used to be something else, and so on and so forth. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
I thought that with my degree and background in economics and political science, I thought it really meshed well. I couldn't be happier doing what I do.
That sounds exciting. Like, I've never thought about the way you said it right there. It's like you're designing the communities that people live in and work in.
In theory, playing a small role in it at least. But we're commercial real estate. You're really, you're only as good as your clients, and we're extremely fortunate to have good clients. Whether it's small business owners like yourself, small, successful, growing, soon to be empire, small business owners, or large established clients like the Arnold companies or the Beach company.
Yeah.
We're extremely fortunate, and we're in a really good place geographically now to help them capitalize on that.
Sure.
So that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah. And I like really your story of how you got into it too, because I know Rox pretty well as well. He's such a great guy, and I can envision that whole conversation.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's also something too of you being able to have a mentor in that space too, that has a wealth of experience.
Absolutely.
And can help guide you through as a newer one too.
Yeah. I'd love to credit myself as much as I can, but the reality is that without a mentor, in this case, Rox is an excellent teacher and has been doing it long enough to know, for the most part, what's right and what's wrong, and there are different ways of doing it. But extremely fortunate, and my learning curve has been and continues to be exponential as a result of getting to be on the team.
It's incredible. It's just another example of a mentor. Like, there are times where people, and even if you want to create, maybe you said, well, your dream is, I want to own my own, I'm just going to make up something, flower shop. The smartest way to get there is maybe to go and be mentored and work for a flower shop locally and learn everything. Who knows? You might be handed the keys to the kingdom one day. And number two, you're going to learn so much through that. And that's the thing, is that you've taken this opportunity. Obviously, it came from trust, relationship that was formed over many years. But now I'm sure he's able to give you a little tough love too, and you're willing to accept it and learn from that. Because I'm assuming that this is it might sound easy, because I think you have everyone has at least 43 realtors in their family of 5. But such a different world. Not saying that residential real estate is truthfully easy, but it seems like there's a lot of people that get into it and maybe make one transaction every 5 years.
Right.
Commercial real estate, I'm thinking, is more of the doctorate degree. In my talking to you guys a little bit more about stuff, there's a lot that goes into the line that you've chosen.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are certainly similarities, and I'd say that you can do a quote unquote easy transaction in either commercial or residential, but by and large, there are many more layers to peel back. And Jim, you know that from experience. But like you were saying before we got on here, is a lot of people, unless they've had reason to know about those layers, have absolutely no idea. And that's, truthfully why it's so important to have a broker or a team of brokers on your side who are doing it day in and day out. And so it's been interesting.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to get into the mechanics of that kind of stuff, because these are all things that I had no clue about. And but we learned we needed a space for the business,
Right.
And way back in 2016, and we learned through experience, but it was invaluable having a broker that helped guide us through those things too. So I'm curious to get your opinions, and with going through some of the mechanics and some of the differences of commercial versus a residential thing, like if we're going to lease something. But also I want to get your opinion first on what would be the triggers for wanting to purchase a commercial property to have your business in versus wanting to lease one?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big question comes down to money.
Yeah.
Right. If we all had unlimited access to capital, or even, 3% seems like nothing now, of course, but even cheap debt, then for many people, it's a very sound argument to say, why would I make all these improvements in someone else's building that, maybe I have 10 or 20 years of leasehold interest in, but by and large, these are fixtures now, and they're not going to, achieve much. So I'd say that, there's certainly value for, if you envision your business on a 10-year plan, that eventually you will have 100 employees, but you start with 3, then maybe you need to do a 1-year lease that allows you the ability to expand and not transact each time you need more space.
Yeah.
However, for some people, like for Jeremy, you want to be here, you want to be downtown, you want to be, right here. So this is perfect for you.
100%.
Location. Whereas, a fast food restaurant, a lot of users, a lot of volume, a lot of people coming in and out, that makes more sense for them to lease because the profitability is there.
Yeah.
So there's so much that could go into it. I get
easily
even distracted thinking about it, but I would say that those are really the big ones that stick out. Also, construction cost. If you want to own your own, but there's nothing existing available, well, you've got to price in the dirt and the price to build your new building. So sometimes it makes sense to lease in the meantime and build up capital and so on and so forth.
Especially, I'm assuming with the cost. I know my church is looking to build a new facility, and talking with churches that even in 2016, 2017 built facilities, and we're talking double.
Yeah.
For not even the same square footage sometimes.
Right.
So, cost has absolutely, become insane with a lot of those things. And I think that's something a lot of folks have to look at. One thing that in learning and getting to know you better that I think that people who use you and your firm can take a lot of pride in is that you each pretty much have your own niche, whatever, however somebody wants to say the word. But for me, niche is the way that I say it. And I'll say that you guys have your own way that you're like, Jeremy, well, this is, I can help in this. And then, but someone on my team can help in this. And I think that's incredible because there's so much that goes into it. Even in the insurance industry, we can't pretend that we're the jack of all trades.
Right.
And I think those that do, maybe they can, but I don't think you can truly do it well.
Right.
Those who have found their specific things that they do them, and they understand the nuances of those. And I think that's really something that I want to commend and learning about you is that you do that.
Yeah. So we a retail specialist, retail and owner occupied properties. And I couldn't even begin to tell you about what goes into, a warehouse or, I got colleagues doing 1 million square foot warehouse leases, and that's a completely different ball game where you need to be constantly monitoring, logistics and trade and all the rest of it. Whereas I'm in retail and I specialize in food and beverage and hospitality uses and owner occupiers. I would say I almost daily read QSR magazine, quick service restaurant magazine, to see what the latest trend is from Subway or Arby's or whatever. Yeah. And that's just, one thing to better help me serve my fast food clients. And so that at Colliers has been really unique. And have greatly benefited from the fact that you call me, you say, I need an office. I say, that's not my thing, but I can refer you to Mary Winter Teaster or Crawford Prezioso, and any of these top-notch brokers in my office. So it's been great.
That's really cool. Yeah. So, you're ready to get into mechanics?
Oh yeah.
Stuff?
Let's do it.
All right. So, so we talked a little bit about purchasing something, but I think that for a lot of especially people starting out, that might not be the most attainable things. I think probably focusing more on lease space would be the way to go with this. So let's kind of just walk through what a process would look like.
Yeah. You use your recent one as
an
an
we can
example.
do that.
Keep dollar amounts out and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's $1 million a month lease. It's quite a lot of physical therapy going on.
This podcast is really doing well, guys.
Yeah. And so if we're
Thank
looking,
you, Billy Colucci.
Yeah, Billy Colucci.
So if we're looking at a in my case, so we were looking to expand our company and move into a little different footprint with that. And so that first part of it is, so our first conversation was, we want to be in a certain area,
right?
But then really, it's kind of going through starting that search process, right. So I guess, gosh, we probably first talked. So we opened in October of 23, but we first talked in winter of 23.
That was probably
sometimes
February, maybe?
something like that.
Sounds right.
And so, so what were some of the questions that you asked of me to try to start to kind of figure out what we wanted, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, first thing is, where do you want to be? And in your case, it was, we have a location here. We don't want to cannibalize this location. We want to offer a service line, and we get a lot of business from a doctor located out here in the Northeast. So we'd like to be in relative proximity to him, and also to the affluent neighborhoods around there. And so we looked and looked and looked. And quite frankly, this is a good example that leads me into where I'm going with this, which is, you really needed 2,500 square feet, 2,500 to 4,000 square feet. However, what we discovered was that pretty much the only piece of real estate in a retail setting with parking and, some visibility was the one that we located. Yeah. And it was 1,450.
1,450.
Yeah. So ideally, you'll get the one next to you and expand into 29. However, what we had to do there, and it's what we're having to do across the board with costs where they are, is be creative and say, okay, do you want to wait 2 or 3 years on the public shopping center where we may or may not get a lease? Or do you want to go ahead and do this and put a plan in place with the landlord, where we've already got it written in? When that tenant goes out, you can expand into it. When he, if he wants to sell the building, if you're in a position to do so, you can make it, being prepared to not get exactly what you want is honestly the first thing. And that's not what you want to tell,
100%.
It's not a sexy thing to tell a client, hey, be prepared to not get it. But with, land at $1 million an acre, $850,000 an acre, and then construction prices on a vertical build, probably $300 a foot or more. Ultimately we determined, okay, we can make do with 1,450. So from there,
we could make do. I will take it.
But outside of size, of course, budget and not just geography, but specifics. Do you need the frontage? Do you need visibility? What kind of access? What kind of parking? Zoning? Thankfully, your use was one that was fine. But if you have a daycare or a convenience store, it requires different zoning.
I'm sure there's some horror stories that comes into play with folks thinking that they can do it themselves, and then all of a sudden finding out, I've just signed this lease or I've done this. I mean, we Daniel, Jim, and I, but we all know someone who went into a space, and I remember them calling me, oh, we're going to get the lease back here. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And it was all this, that, and the other, but they had the confidence of at least knowing someone, right. So I can only imagine what people could get themselves into in a commercial lease if they don't have the right representation.
Right. Well, and I mean, we talked about COVID. A lot of landlords were left with the short end of the stick coming out of COVID. So-and-so went out and they went bankrupt. And, at the end of the day, owning commercial property is great, but you really, your value is derived from the value of your leases and therefore the guarantee on your income. And so that's another big thing to have sorted out on the front end is your financing. I've worked with a group for over a year and a half, contingent on SBA. SBA never happened. Ideally, they have some other mechanism of funding they can fall back on. In this case, thankfully they did, because of a lot of time and whatnot, but it happens, and so being prepared and making sure you've got all that all those boxes checked in advance.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing to echo too for anyone who is wanting to start pursuing these things too. Is be prepared for the landlord to want to see all your financials,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and because they want to make sure that they're fully vetting a potential tenant too. And
Right.
so it's that can be something that you wouldn't even anticipate happening.
Right.
And be prepared too that they're going to ask questions about, all right, well, I mean, what are you doing with this?
Right.
And because they want to see if you're a viable business, that if you're signing a 5-year lease, you're actually going to stay open for 5 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, that's the thing a lot of people don't get
Yeah.
is, I'd love to operate on good faith. My clients unfortunately don't, and so, or fortunately, in this case, but, the end of the day, you shouldn't be shocked about financials. It's just like applying for a loan.
Yes.
They're essentially loaning you the space for the duration of the lease term and the options and so on and so forth. But every month that rent is due, and so having business license, your architect, your contractor, if you have to make modifications to the space, having that all lined up and knowing who to reach out to about that and how to best approach it is
I have a friend who, unfortunately, their business just went under. Hated out there out in the Irmo area, had a facility, running a good shop, but unfortunately, the heat caused the air conditioning units to go out, which then broke like 5 pieces of equipment in their kitchen. And then looking in the lease, it was 100% their responsibility, even though they were just renting the space to replace those. And unfortunately, between everything, they just didn't have enough money to do it, which unfortunately caused a franchise business to completely go under.
Yeah.
And just talk with him, it's like, he was like, man, I wish that I had read and this is a guy that I absolutely respect and has so much heart and runs a good business and served a local community. And unfortunately, we have that good faith, that like, oh, this is good or that's good, or, everything's going to be okay. But man, having someone to help you look at the pitfalls and say, hey, you should probably have a budget for this. Although it's not happening tomorrow, like, you understand you are responsible for this. And this is the average cost of these units and you and I were speaking earlier today, just talking about, somewhere across the street and the build outs and this, that, and that. And when you get to hearing how much it costs and this, that, I mean, it's just mind blowing when you go through it, but you've got to understand the landlord, if they're giving you X amount of dollars to renovate towards this and they're building it out and the lease and all these different things there, you can't expect that they're going to just, you're going to have to take some responsibility because you didn't have to go purchase. You could have, could have gone build something from the ground up, but you didn't have to. So there's it's not like my house has an issue, my residential home. I think a lot of times we just assume what's residential is the same way in commercial. And if my air conditioning goes out, well, that's the landlord's. That's not necessarily the case.
Right.
And that, to me, that was like, wow. Like, man, I never would have thought about that. It was a moment where even I was educated in that, like, this one thing completely blew up a business.
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. And that brings like a good point of having the right person to be able to guide you just so you know those things. Because if you're going to lead through a prospective lease, different things like that, of being able to understand what all the terminology is. And then also, oh man, I am responsible for if the AC units go out, I got to pay for that.
Right.
And it's like, well, man, that doesn't make sense. I don't own that place.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of how most commercial leases are structured.
That's why it's important to, on the front end, say, we're okay with that as long as you'll provide a condition report.
Yeah.
And, if it's a 20-year-old unit, I'm not taking responsibility for that. I'll take the first $500 a year, so many different ways you can structure it, but it's just important to have someone on your side who's done it 1,000 times and said, okay, well, there's 1,000 different ways to skin a cat.
Yep.
Here's just one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
no, that's
all right. So we got that part of it. So, all right. So we find the space.
Yep.
Then what's our next step?
Next step would be submitting a letter of intent.
Yep.
That's just a basic non-binding term sheet and showing who you are, what you plan to do. The majority of leases, not all of them, but the majority of leases are dollars per square foot in rent. And so what's the square footage? What's the layout of the space? All that. And then go back and forth on that. terms, commencement, landlord contribution, additional provisions, all that good stuff. Submit that. Ideally, you move to lease. During that time, maybe they have a inspection on the HVAC already handy. Maybe they need to have it done, while you're going back and forth on that and getting through the finer points. And that's really where the mechanics are, is in the finer points. And so, like in your case, it's a triple net lease. And a lot of people who call, and a lot of residential agents who call and say, well, what's the lease rate? And I say, well, it's $25 a foot, triple net. I say, well, what are triple nets? So triple nets in retail, primarily retail leases, are taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, which are reimbursable charges to the landlord. So your base rent may be $25 a foot, but the triple nets may be another $7 a foot. So your gross lease rate is actually $32 a foot. And so that's a lot of the time, that's where the issues arise. And so those are done on an annual or monthly reconciliation basis. If you're in a single tenant building, just you on a pad like a Waffle House, then you're paying 100%. That's your pro rata share, 100% of the taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. Now, you may, as part of your lease, you may have written in there, landscape is also on the tenant. Okay, well, then that wouldn't be a common area charge now, but it's still a charge to you. So the bottom line, and what we really talked about, is these are all things against your bottom line, whether they're categorized differently or not. They're costs that are expected to be paid monthly. So
I think it's important to note too, just the difference in how rates are versus like a residential. So we go rent an apartment, you're paying $1,500 a month.
Right.
That's what that rate is. Where if we're looking at a commercial property, that $25 a foot is per year,
right,
for that. So I think that was something that I had no idea about before I started looking at our first place. So if we have something that's $25 a foot a year, it's going to be $25 times 2,000 square feet, then divided by 12 would be our monthly rent for that stuff too. And so it's just a little different.
Yeah. Whereas
that,
here, like Jeremy, you have a full service lease. Full service means everything. Everything is already factored into that number: water, janitorial, you name it, electricity, everything.
They even give me free air to breathe. I mean, it's
more than most.
It's a unique, but I will tell you that, like, I love this type of lease for the situation that we're in now too, because it is so nice to not have to, it's 3 extra bills, 3 less bills you have to worry about. It's like, and it kind of caught me off the first few months. Because I was always like, when am I going to get this one? I'm like, wait, it's all built in, and it's nice. But there's also negatives, because when you're in spaces like this, like I am, you can easily hear sometimes the office next. There are cons at the same time. Certainly. A lot of times to the ease of it, and then also from what I hear, I'm not sure, it's a lot harder to get out of these type of leases. Like I've heard from other people in the building, like, oh, well, I was in another and it was a much easier, but the type of lease that you have here is much more difficult. Once again, I have no clue. They didn't really check much financials or this, that, and when we came about this lease. It was kind of pretty simple process in a co-working space, but I'm assuming this is not your most common type of lease.
In office, a lot of office leases are full service or modified gross. Maybe there's some janitorial responsibilities. Again, not my wheelhouse. I defer you to Tommy Johnson. I would say that by and large, 90% of what we do are fully triple net leases.
Gotcha.
Where, the main questions are, landlord will cover roof and structure.
Yep.
But everything that's within those 4 walls is yours.
Yeah.
Including if your air conditioner breaks and ceiling tiles get messed up, hopefully they've insured with Powers Insurance. But, it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
And so knowing all of what you're responsible for on the front end is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Especially, and I would say on both sides, as a tenant and then as a landlord, making sure that your tenant knows what they're responsible for so that they can perform in their lease.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, I've learned so much, even myself.
And so, so John knows a little bit about kind of our original location too. So we had some issues plumbing wise and all kinds of stuff like that, where it's like water spraying out of the ceiling and all kinds of stuff like that. We have a really good landlord who's very supportive of things too. But it's like, I got to pay to replace all those ceiling tiles. I got to do all that kind of stuff because that's that's what's outlined in the lease.
Yeah.
If there's a roof leak or something like that, then the landlord handles that. But those are all things that we got to be aware of. That there are these expenses that you need to be able to be prepared for and anticipate. That might not be, that are so much different than a residential kind of thing.
And it's just setting that up in your budget, and hopefully, I'm sure that's something that you guys talk to your clients about. Hey, you need to have an oh crap budget. You know what I mean? Like, you need to set aside for when things don't go, or everything's going well in your business, but not so well in that wall where a pipe just burst.
Right.
And you've got all this going on. And, I think that that's important to have someone that's willing to, I always jokingly, Dan Kadar, which all of us at this table know, is a good friend of mine. I'm always told you about these ideas that I have, this, that, the other. And I'm always like, you're my devil's advocate. You're the one that pulls me down from the clouds.
Right.
And you need that almost in this situation, because you go into it and you're just so excited about, we're going to do this profit, we're going to make this difference in our community. And a lot of times you're just so excited about even like this office. If I could go back now, I might have downsized a little bit because I really work from home a lot. But I was so excited that I just looked at what was coming and not what it was going to be like when you were there, And so I think it's so often to have someone to say, hey, like, let's talk about it. Let's figure out what's the reality of it and what do you really need. Man, I think that just helps whenever that sticker shock or whenever the newness wears off. It helps you be like, man, we really did make a good decision. Because one thing you guys talked about earlier that I thought was so important is like location. You might think, oh, I just want to have this great spot. It's going to be right here, and it's like, well, no, actually, most of the traffic comes from this, and most of this, and most of that, because you have all these statistics, all this data. I've got to assume that plays a huge role.
Absolutely.
And where a client might think is not often where they land. Not only can they not find the right size or this, that, and the other, like you say, have realistic expectations, but a lot of times what they think they want is truthfully what would be detrimental to their business.
Absolutely. No, that's such a great point. We had a recent example of that with a fast food like concept, kind of like a Chipotle. And they saw a flyer, out of market franchisee coming into market, saw a flyer for a property that looked like it was first row, right, by a large development. Well, the reality is you've got to go off the main road, back around, and then there's a right in, right out only here, and then you can only get out there. So if your business is a lot of people quickly coming in and picking up mobile orders to go, that ain't it. And so that's why, even on some of the larger accounts that we work on where maybe there's a master broker, right, which means a nationwide real estate representative. Well, that's why there's value in having sub-agents and people there, boots on the ground, who can say, it may look like this, but here's the reality of the situation. And that's the same, whether it's national or local or, just getting started, is to really dive into that and focus on, okay, is this sustainable?
Yeah.
Because you get the best lease rate, if you sign a longer term and you've got good financials and the rest of it. But if it's not in your interest and you're going to end up growing such that you need 3 of these, then maybe, you
shot yourself in the foot.
Exactly.
And that's why I think it's so vital in each of our industries. I would consider us experts in what we do. And that it's so important because you see folks that aren't that. And it's easy for us to point it out because we're in this realm, but it's always so nice to meet someone else and to work with someone and understand, like, man, and really every business, there's so many blind spots that you just don't see.
Yeah.
That you just don't think of. And as I work with Jim more often and learn so much about his things, like I think about things I never did in the medical side of things with service and the reason you maybe do this or that. And then in your realm, like my eyes have been open to so many things. And I think that is what's so important because you have all these brokerages that are national and, they have the commercials and they built the brand, but the brand is not looking out for you. The brand is there to build a wealth for the company that has created that brand, And so I think we live in a world where we're so sold on like brand names. And man, I just really wonder when the world's going to open their eyes to the fact that doesn't always mean the best.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, it just speaks to, you need to have trusted advisors in every realm. of things. So to fill the gaps that you don't know or your blind spots. All right. So we're so kind of going through that whole process too. So we found a spot. We've got a letter of intent on it where we've made an offer on what our lease rate would be, or what we propose as a lease rate. What kind of upfit we would want to do, whether we're going to cover that cost ourselves or if that's something we're asking for the landlord to help with that too.
And that's a really important thing. I think we should dive into that right there, because that is the biggest question, right? I mean, in some properties, there's a inherent value to leasing the property as is. Some of them are turnkey restaurants. Some of them are turnkey medical offices. Some of them are multi-purpose office, creative, like this. Well, when it came to yours, that wasn't the right layout at all. It had accounting offices and had a lot of partition walls, thankfully not demising, but partition walls. And so the big question there was, we can submit a preliminary and non-binding LOI, but we need to get these numbers back and say, preliminarily, we expect to, do this with the space, do that with space, but then we realize, okay, well, the air conditioning's gone. It doesn't work. Okay, so we may go back and say, hey, we're planning to do X, X, and X. We're guaranteeing the lease personally for this amount of time, but what we're asking for in return is that you put the air conditioning back and replace the air conditioning, put it in good working order for us. In some cases, you can ask for, or the landlord will offer what's called a tenant improvement allowance, and that is the most common deal structure. You take the space as it is. The landlord will reimburse you up to that amount when you start paying rent. So in the case, we do some restaurant leases where taking it from a raw shell, cold, dark shell, no air conditioning, nothing, maybe they get $70 a foot in TI. Okay. So if that's, 3,000 square feet, that's $210,000.
Break down. What is TI for us?
Tenant improvement. Okay, so per square foot, let's say you're leasing 3,000 square feet, it's going to give you $70,000, or excuse me, it's going to give you $70 a foot.
Gotcha. Which
is $210,000. Now the total build out cost is probably more like $500,000.
Yeah.
But the landlord understands, hey, you're making these lasting improvements, bathrooms, plumbing, air conditioning, walls, all the rest of it. And then a lot of the rest of it are going to be finishes of your choice. They're going to be trade based and whatnot, but I know it takes this much to get in. I'm willing to give you this much. That's the most common deal structure. So in that case, you would say, okay, in your letter of intent, we've got a lease rate we've agreed on. We've got, here's the space we're talking about. Here's the per square foot lease rate. Here's what we're getting from the landlord. And then we need 180 days or the earlier of. So the commencement date, rent commencement date, more importantly, is the next big thing and this is what throws a lot of wrinkles and things. And this is where a lot of people have to be flexible and there's not much desire to do so. But the reality is permitting and getting architectural plans and all the rest of it. Not only is it expensive, but oftentimes tedious and takes a while. So
even in what you were doing, you had to get all, oh, wow.
So in our situation, so we built in I think we ended up putting a LOI in July, early July.
Sounds right.
Got it. I think we got the lease officially signed late July.
Well, that was different too. We were competing with somebody else and we had to back and forth.
So back and forth, we had to negotiate a little bit, rate wise, all those things too. Yeah. But then, so we get that part of it. And so we're able to negotiate. And so that's where a broker's invaluable too, of like, all right, well, this is what the market is. So are we overpaying or are we right where we should be?
That's huge.
Gosh, when we did our first offer, it was below what the asking rate was. You're not going to just go ahead and give them what they want, right?
We didn't know anybody else was interested.
Yeah. But then, so they come back and there's somebody else who put a LOI on it too.
Wow.
And they were pretty transparent about like where they were at with that. And so it was this decision on my part. It was like, all right, this is what it's going to cost to do this. Do we do it or not?
Are we willing to do it?
Right. And but then we also look at, I think we had a conversation of, all right, well, does this still reflect market rate? We want to make sure we're not just being gouged.
Yeah, right.
And it was.
That's where having a professional is so huge, because it's not like you're renting an apartment and you're just like, it's $1,500 a month. Right. It's like, when you get into all this, I mean, how much are they going to give you for this? How much, like, you know what to ask for. I would assume that so many people trying to go into it on their own. Number one, a landlord's probably not even willing to talk to a lot of people that are trying to go in.
Depends on the landlord,
Yeah,
right?
I
If it's
guess.
an institutional, national landlord, they're typically not going to, just be waiting by the phone, waiting on
That's
Joe
right.
Schmo to call.
Yeah.
There are avenues and pathways, and they're not exclusive to brokers, but there's certainly a fast lane, if you will,
Yeah.
or ideally so.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what I find interesting is when you were building this out, just a question that I came to my mind: did you build out your facility in a manner that you can easily knock down a wall and it just all will come together, or was that not possible because of the? I just wondered, did the preparation come into that?
So I think you know me well enough to know that I'm not taking a space that I don't already have future plans for.
Yeah.
So yeah, so,
Absolutely. Yeah,
So-
a lot of people I think maybe wouldn't think about that, but I knew that you obviously answered that question correctly. But I always wonder too, like, because of where things are, maybe did you have to settle? And you're like, man, now we have to come back in and like, can you negotiate? Let's just say that you were getting in the spot and you couldn't because of where maybe the wall was, this, that, and the other. You had to build it in a way that you're like, man, there's no way once we take over both spots, it's going to be able to stay this way. Are you able to maybe work out in that contract, hey, when we do have to come back and do this again, you gave us 70 this time, but we're going to ask for 100 that time in TI or whatever it was called, because we've already spent so much money the first time that now we have to kind of rip out again and redo.
Well, I would say that, of course, going to be dependent on landlord's interest and expanding you. And, in Jim's case, it's in the landlord's best interest, in my opinion, to expand and extend.
I agree.
Right. And so in that case, it would be, it was a 4-year initial lease term or something like that.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's a year from now. So maybe you've got 2 years left and you say, okay, tenant will remain, and complete its obligation here. However, now the space is double and we're going to go ahead and extend to 5 years or 10 years or, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And that can make the landlord more comfortable in giving you some TI, which will say, okay, I'm interested in investing in your expansion here. I'd like a 7-year lease renewal as sort of the trade-off.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So different ways to do it.
Yeah. So many
It could
different
be
things
that
to
he
think
says,
about.
hey, the market out here is actually triple what it was. I'm going to just lease this to someone else. Well, we've got in the lease, fair market value.
Yeah.
We try to get it at the same rate. They didn't go for that. But anyways, so long-winded answer to your question, but it depends.
Yeah.
Certainly in some cases.
And I think it's important. So like in our case, this is something where, it's not a definite that we're going to need the space, but we want to make sure that we're allowing for the options for those things too.
Yep.
And so I'm very interested in if we have an opportunity to purchase commercial real estate, that's what we want to do. And so we want to make sure that if there's ever a point where a site is for sale, that we get the first option to be able to do that. And so those are all things that are forward thinking things that we need to have built into it. All right. So we got so we go through, we submit our LOI. We end up needing to negotiate a little bit. We finally arrive at our price point. We get a lease signed. And then that's where, as part of that lease, like John was talking about, we have this period of where we're not actually paying rent, where we're doing all the construction stuff. And so that's where we got to make sure that we're on top of things from a timing standpoint of, we need to get the permitting. We got to get the plans drawn. We got to get contractor ready to go, all those kind of things, because all those things have to drop into place.
You got to mesh all the timelines up and
to meet this timeline. So we don't have a space that we're paying rent on that we can't use yet.
Yeah.
And so that's where it can be. So, I mean, I use a lot of y'all's resources we had to find somebody to do the drawings for us. And so we go through that process. So we have contractor. So John was very helpful in being able to meet at the space so we can do a walkthrough with the contractor and looking at all those different type things too. And so so then it's a kind of an ongoing support things too. And you would check in with me probably weekly. It was like, how are things going? Anything that you need help with? all those kind of things too.
That's huge.
But ultimately, it's invaluable to have that guidance going through those things too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say that kind of goes back to, you know, what are your values? What are you bringing? You know, an exceptional level of service is what we strive to provide, and that's what that is, and that's much easier when you have a client who's transparent, straightforward, okay with showing their financials. Because
you mean every client's not like that?
Oh man, I wish. But you know, as opposed to some people who we work with, or they talk to me and then they, as soon as they hang up the phone with me, they call somebody at a different company, and you know, it gives me great confidence and the ability to do my job at, I'd like to think 100%, being, you know, when we've got that sort of relationship. And that's what I strive to have. We as a team strive to have with all of our clients.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, I think you're right. I saw a space before we wrap up. I saw a space in Irma, and it blows my mind. It's in Harbison. There was beside the Dicks, there was like a trampoline park that was gonna go right in there, and they literally got the sign up. I mean, it was going to be there forever. And all of a sudden, you saw they're doing all kind of work inside, and then it all just falls apart.
Right.
And it just blows my mind, like how much money went into what they did, but now
60,000
nothing
square foot space.
Yeah, now nothing is
Huge.
happening with that. Like someone just and so but I always wondered, did they not have the right advice, the right advisors? You know, I mean, obviously there can be plenty of pitfalls, but you know, so it just, to me, when you think about a business, like we started with $3,000 in our pocket and a dream.
Yeah.
Here's someone that just invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now that's just gone.
Right.
You know, and it just, to me, just blows my mind. But just even more reason. So what we'd say before we wrap up, if you are talking to someone, or you could share like a quick, like, hey, these are the 3 things or 2 or 3 things that you want to have ready before you contact or talk to someone, or these are things like the little blueprint that you should have. What should someone that's saying in 2024, I'm ready to take my business to the next level, what should those few things be before they come into contact with someone like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly a clear picture of what you want. That's the main thing. You got to have the direction. We can provide you with the information, but ultimately it's your decision. Second, I'd say financials. You know, good or bad, you know, long or short, the landlord wants an honest picture of what the financials look like.
Sure.
And I would say, you know, beyond that, a business plan. You know, if you're just getting started, having your ducks in a row, showing that you can be organized and clearly, you know, produce and act on an idea, you know, that's what a lot of landlords want to see.
Yeah, that's great.
And I really want to echo that point too, because I know whenever I first started my first business back in 2016, we didn't have any legs to stand on. It was just, this is what the plan is.
Right.
But we had a pretty extensive business plan, and we had the SBA backing and all those kind of things too. And that what was necessary to get this landlord to take a chance on our business
100%
too. And so the more you can be prepared for those things, the better off you're going to be.
That's great. But I would say, you know, we want to give people an opportunity that listen to this. I'm sure nationally you can make referrals, and or locally, whether it, you know, we know your wheelhouse is one thing, which is going to be that retail and or I guess food. What can you say?
So we are retail specialists. We do a lot of shopping centers. We do a lot of food and beverage, whether that's freestanding fast food or local restaurants. Like a really exciting one going into the former Jason's Deli, Chris Fitz and his partner, wild game concept called The Hollow.
That's cool.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
So open, I believe, mid-January before Valentine's Day.
Okay.
So really exciting. A lot of exciting stuff going on down in the Vista.
So you have that expertise, and then in your team, like you said, you named off multiple names of people that can help in any facet. So if folks want to reach out to you, they just have questions. Is it okay for someone that says, hey, maybe I'm 2 years out, to still go ahead and reach out and say, hey, how,
Absolutely.
Maybe advise me where to create a business plan or this. I'm sure you're more than happy. I knew you would say that. And so how can folks that are 2 years out or tomorrow they're ready to start talking, how can they best get in contact with you?
Well, so those are the conversations that I like to have the most. Okay. I'd love it if you called me tomorrow and said, I got $10 million I want to invest, but that doesn't happen. And so it doesn't happen often, or to me. So I would say, you know, that's the best time to start looking, with pricing where it is, with the market velocity, how it is, which means property comes to market. it's almost always snapped up within that first initial wave of, diffusion, right? And so I would say getting started earlier is better. Yeah. And what that means is we can continue to keep a tab open, keep a search logged, log inventory, provide you with that so that when you're able to make the decision, you're equipped to do so.
Yep.
So I'd say that's the best thing. And that, some people who are in our B&I group, lease space now, say, man, this business cash flowing well, we could afford a mortgage of X. Let's buy a building and let's use the cash flow from this business to build equity and quite frankly, wealth for ourselves. Yeah, so sure. SBA, as you mentioned too, loves to lend on owner occupied properties. Yeah. So you can collateralize the loan, have a good solid idea and backing. That's the way to go.
What's good contact number, email, things like that, where people can get in touch with you?
Yeah. 803-760-5824 or john.gressette, GRESSETTE at Colliers, COLLIERS.com.
Perfect.
And I can leave a business card here.
That's right. We can come down to the office and grab that business card.
Yeah, come on down and see Powers Insurance Experts.
Yeah. That's right.
And we'll definitely put that in the show notes and all that stuff too. But
absolutely, man. Well, it's been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks, guys.
I've learned a lot today, and definitely excited. Obviously we've been talking about some fun ideas that we want to bring to life. And
absolutely.
So it's just great to know that we have professional, and we are excited to be able to share that with you guys. So remember, purpose over profits. Columbia is a beautiful place. As the past few weeks, we talked about great guests that believe in Columbia. If you're one of those, come move here. Be a part of building Columbia. And we've got the perfect person that can help you get that space. So guys, as always, live purpose over profits. That's what makes what you do so special. And we're just so thankful to be here this new year with you and take on 2024.